Today's conversation is inspired by women who have consistently defined themselves as artists and pioneers in the music field. Having played second fiddle to their male counterparts, they have been denied interviews and conversations about their journeys in music. So, our next guest was then commissioned to tell these remarkable journeys in a book called Fabulous Female Musicians by author Sammy Stein, who is known for her direct and supportive approach to musicians and their music. This remarkable book that shifts the spotlight and celebrates the exceptional talent and inspiring stories of top female musicians. Of course, Sammy Stein has had several books published on jazz music. And joining us from London in the United Kingdom this afternoon, please welcome Sammy Stein. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Lovely to finally to speak to you directly.
Thank you for joining us, and it's lovely to meet you. It's lovely to meet you. And as we begin today's conversation, Sammy, I want us to talk about, or share a brief history, about Sammy and how you got to do this important work, of amplifying women's voices in music.
Well, it came about because I was a columnist and reviewer, and obviously then I got to meet and speak to lots and lots of musicians. And one of the things that came through was lots of the women, first of all, I thought they were just like having a bit of a moan, because they were saying about how hard they worked and how they'd been passed over, or they felt they were passed over,
Yeah.
and they felt that they didn't really have a voice. Well, they had a voice, but it wasn't listened to, and they were getting increasingly frustrated. And then I ran a small jazz festival in London called the London Jazz Platform. And that really, conversations that came out of that, with men as well as women, really sort of highlighted this issue. And I never intended to be, the author that everyone goes to for women in jazz issues,
Yeah.
or now it's women in music. But it's just kind of worked out that way because I felt quite strongly. I suppose being a woman myself, but when I've heard, and it's not just women, it's people of different gender, as well, who identify differently from, in inverted commas, the norm.
Yeah.
I've actually called out editors when they've written homophobic or misogynistic articles.
Mm,
And one of them I actually said, my friend, how did this get past your watch? And he changed the article and he apologized, but then of course he panned the book. He got his revenge. So you do take a risk when you speak out, for
mm.
any musician. If it's not their voice directly, you're kind of speaking for them. And although they might like that, I don't think they realize that there's always payback.
Yeah, there is. Yeah, yeah. What probably invited and or maybe even got me curious was your book, Women in Jazz, which explores the journeys of women in jazz and uses a wide angle lens, to look at how women in different roles have helped shape jazz. Tell us more about this book, Sammy.
Well, again, it came from exactly those origins, but I wanted to kind of show people that it wasn't just women as performers, as there's incredible instrumentalists and vocalists, obviously who are female, but there's also increasingly there are managers. I spoke to one last night, a lady called Charlotte Keefe, who manages Ian Shaw, and they're so savvy, they're so switched on. And she was picking up detail when they were doing the radio recording. She was saying, he's paused that, so that he can edit. And I was thinking, I hadn't even noticed the pause, but, because one of the guys, he fluffed his lines and he then did a deliberate pause so that he could edit. And she's kind of aware of all these, the little nuances that go on. And of course, we're talking, revenue and commerciality and things. And it's just, they're not any more switched on than men, but they're
Yeah.
now in these positions where they're just the same as men. And she'd actually replaced a man, I think, in her position. So
Yeah.
things are changing. And until I researched for the book, I didn't realize how many record labels have women in really senior positions. But then I talked to a man and I talked to a woman, and I think he brought up the fact that in his particular record label, the women were paid slightly less than the men. And I asked why, and he said, I have no idea.
Yeah.
So I kind of thought, well, that's still wrong. you know?
And I think you and I will touch a bit on the empowerment and development in the arts a bit later in this conversation. But
Yeah.
let's go back to well, since that first publication, then you wrote, Pause, Play, Repeat, a book that also talks about how musicians were affected during the pandemic. And I picked up the importance there of partnerships and collaboration. So I wanted to pick your brain. How have these partnerships helped the creative space, as it were, particularly, in the face of adversity?
Well, I think in a lot of ways, lockdown was negative for musicians. I mean, I was talking to people last night, and they were saying, not being able to be in the same room, in the same studio was awful. But being creative people, they looked at what they had around them, in the same way that jazz and hip hop and all these genres have developed.
Yeah.
They looked at what was around them and they thought, what can we do? They had technology and they had brains that understood technology, unlike me. And so they began collaborating with each other and they began recording their part and then sending their part away and then having it another part, overdubbed on the top and all this kind of thing. And then they would go and they would strip parts away and add in another part. And it was just incredible what they were doing. And
Yeah.
how technology kind of serviced that, if you like. But these people, they knew how to use it. And then something very interesting happened. There were these collaborations happening between musicians from all over the world who'd literally just connected with each other online and said, look, I'm in Australia, in Australia, it's a really awful position that we have here. You're in London,
Yeah.
how's it going for you? And they would say, well, it's going really well for me, but I've recorded this bass line and I think it's just so good. And then the guy from Australia will go, oh, that's great because I've got this keyboard line and send me your bass line. So this little collaboration started, and there were cross world collaborations, and it was like sitting back and thinking, it's just amazing. But what really kind of struck me was that I don't think people really understood how, for a musician and also a venue,
Yeah.
that the income it didn't just tail off the way it did for most of us. It fell off a cliff. Like one minute they had a diary full of gigs, the next minute absolutely nothing. So
Yeah.
they were kind of, and a lot of them seemed to escape the grants and things like that. They were really difficult to find. So what I did with what I'm doing with the profits from this book actually they don't go to musicians, they go towards venues. So there's a
Yeah.
particular there's a guitarist called Nigel Price who started this grassroots, supporting venues
Yeah.
because he, like me, thinks if there aren't venues, then there's not going to be places where they can actually get together live. And
That's right.
last night it was actually a really good example of that. They made this album during lockdown,
Yeah.
and he explained this process that they went through, but there's nothing like seeing them together on stage, both for the listeners and and the band themselves.
Mm.
Yeah.
Really, really great work that you're doing. And I thank you for thinking of the venues because they are always the last ones to benefit from any sort of, club together collectiveness in terms of support. But thank you so much for doing this work. Kofifi FM, we are in conversation with author Sammy Stein, whose work honors musicians in the jazz world. And of course, in two of her publications here, we are talking about that. And also, we have another one, which is fast forwarded to 2022. The Wonder of Jazz is published. And this time, you are talking about jazz and how you enjoy and celebrate the art form. So my question here, let's reflect on this one. The first time you encountered jazz, or maybe who made Sammy fall in love with jazz?
It was actually the violinist from King Crimson, believe it or not. It's a very strange story, but I lived in Belsize Park in London. I live in Suffolk now, but I did live in London.
Mm.
And there was a jazz club across the road, and I played clarinet, but I didn't have a clarinet. But I thought I'll just go and listen in, and it was more like an education sort of centre. And this jazz club spoke group was a bit daunting. Everyone sat around in this big circle, and David sort of got people to come in and play different things and
Yeah.
everything. And then he looked at me, and I just said, I'm just watching. I'm just
Yeah.
observing and see how it works." And he said, "No, no, no, no. We don't have we don't have that here." And he made me sing. And I'd sung opera and things before, but I'd not really sung jazz. And then on the back of that, I ended up in a little kind of offshoot group from from the Belsize Park Club, and we did covers and we did lots of jazz numbers because that was where those people. And actually I wasn't at the time. I was more into sort of punk things like that.
Mhm.
But then I went to one of them. I went to the London, the Camden Jazz Festival. I don't even know if it still runs now, but I saw George Melly,
Yeah.
and I was just blown away. Although I wouldn't put him as sort of straight ahead jazz, but I just enjoyed, and I realized that there was a vibe that I hadn't really got until now. And then I started listening. Then I found free jazz,
Yeah.
and then I've now expanded my taste. But I mean, I think music is it's a great leveler and it's a great connector. You can be from any culture, any background, um, have any kind of political view or whatever.
That's right.
But music,
Yeah.
music just connects us all, and I love music, plants, art. I love subjects like that just sweep these ridiculous limitations that we kind of self-impose. And I just love when they're just swept away and we're just talking,
Yeah.
and communicating.
Yeah.
And that's what music
Absolutely.
does.
Absolutely. Your latest book, yeah, Fabulous Female Musicians, takes us on a journey around the globe, capturing the stories of 21 musicians. Why was it important for you to tell this tale?
Well, it was important. I mean, first of all, it was important to broaden a little bit away from jazz, because jazz influences and is connected to so many different genres. Classical, third stream,
Yeah.
funk, hip hop, of course, R&B. It's just so interconnected, and there's all these different timescales going on. And I thought, people that get labeled jazz musicians, they actually play many, many other things. So some of these musicians are really specialised in classical, some specialise more in kind of funk. So I've got, although I drew from my jazz cohort, as it were, because that's where my connections with. I what I did to get the women, I threw out a question on social media. I said, hey, you guys, um, give me the name of 10 women who you feel influence you now. And
Yeah.
I got 58 names.
Wow.
I mean, one or two I could kind of dismiss because they were that they're no longer with us. And I thought, no, I'm actually going to make the book about people who are now and current. And that was a decision I had. So I had left with about 55, 56 names.
Yeah.
So then I had to research every woman and whittle down, and then see just how influential that they were. And I ended up with 25, and then 21 came back and said, absolutely, we'd love to do this. And it's really strange because I think they love, I've used a scaffold of very similar questions to each woman so that readers get this comparison.
Hmm.
Where did you start? How did you start? How did you find your instrument? And yet, although it's scaffolded around those same questions, the
Yeah.
answers are so diverse. And it's really interesting how, like, where they grew up and whether they've had misogyny, whether they've had difficulties, whether they've had racism, which, whether they've had, there's a couple of them are transgender, whether they've had issues around that,
Yeah.
none of which should be happening, but they are happening. And I said to them, speak as freely as you like, but also, if you don't want to tell me stuff,
Yeah.
but they all told me loads of stuff, and I said a lot of it I was going, is this okay? Is this okay to put in a book? And they were going, yes, absolutely, because I think they feel when they're in the company of 20 other women, they can speak so much more freely, and so issues that they kind of wouldn't put out there, I think they felt very comfortable doing it with me, because they know from my interviews in the past that some things that I just won't include in an interview if I don't think they're going to benefit, not benefit, but if I think they're going to offend or perhaps, so I'll just say, well, we'll skip that bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
um, but a lot of issues that I felt important, I was suddenly given this opportunity to allow them to voice that, and it was very inspiring, just talking to so many women. And then they're not just music, they don't just do music. A lot of them, they're educators, and they're inspirational in themselves.
Wonderful. I look forward to reading that because I think I haven't had an opportunity to yet. But I look forward to exploring more and reading about these wonderful tales of these 21 musicians from across the globe,
Well,
getting
it's out
into.
on the 12th of September.
Oh, I look forward to my copy. I look forward to my
Yeah.
copy. Of course, Kofifi, we're still with, Sammy Stein, and we're talking everything literature as we fuse, jazz and literature here on the show ever so effortlessly. And also important issues around how, we view the world and how the world views artists and music in the jazz space. And thinking around empowerment and development in the arts, Sammy, we're seeing a rise of women who are now officially taking charge, both in their music and in the business of music. In your opinion, why do you think that this is only happening now, or perhaps have we not been investing, in education, in the educational aspect as we should?
I think it's this kind of slow burn of a change of attitude. I mean, I've spoken to brass teachers, a brass teacher, and all the kids under his care could choose an instrument when they were aged 11. And a girl chose a trombone. And then he said, the next day, her parents were around the school asking if she could have a more feminine instrument. So people still encourage women to go into learning an instrument that are more orchestral rather than soloists. And they don't want them to be seen blowing hard or getting carried away on stage and things like that. So I think that there's still this sort of slight attitude, if you like, of society. But I also think women are, because they're becoming more prevalent in things like engineering and science and medicine. I think that's just permeating through to the natural progression, which is, how we enjoy ourselves, which is the arts, and how we're inspired, which is the arts. And I think also things like festivals. I mean, when I did my book on gender, I literally counted up the number of men and women in
Yeah.
festivals, which is a
Yeah.
very, very sad thing to do, you might think, but it was almost, I think it was 1 to 5 at the end. And that
Mm.
was 4 years ago. So, and so many women. There was one trumpet player said that she phoned up a guy about a festival, and he said, "Well, I've got my female cohort now," because he wanted to get 1 to 6, and he said, "But do you know of any men
Yeah.
who are available?" And he said that to a soloist, trumpet player, which I just found incredibly. And this thing about, well, I've reached my numerical cohort. I mean, there shouldn't be a cohort. You should just listen, and if someone's good, you should
Mm.
give them a platform. It
That's
shouldn't
right.
matter about. So yeah, I think it's changed, but I think also venue people have told me that since they have put more women on stage, because of this thing that people like to see people like them
Yeah.
doing things that they like, because
Mm.
they then think, I could do that. That could easily be me. They've seen their audiences grow as well in diversity. They've seen families come rather than just men.
Yeah.
So I think it's the knock-on benefits, and then you get everything else that comes with that. They sell more drinks, they sell more food. I think there's so much to benefit from
Yeah.
diversifying the audience.
And we love to see it. I think it also, kind of balances out the scales a little bit. And we get the different kind of energies, both from the male and the female artists who kind of contributes to this ecosystem, as it were, from the different sides. And it's lovely to see. It's wonderful to be a part of. And thank you for documenting it and also, kind of being a pioneer, a driver, of such processes, with the work that you do. You travel a lot. And I think the last time you and I were chatting on Twitter, and you were in a city somewhere. I think you were, on a bit of a break, and you shared this photo, which I then said, that's a beautiful. And you were talking about how, the beginning of the day and the ending of the day, and how people move about in different cities. And I said to you, that is a wonderful way to people watch. Is that what you do every single time? Are you like me? Do you always enjoy people watching?
I love people. I mean, it's really strange. I mean, well, last night was an example. I went the, the show I was doing. It was with 10 people who I didn't really know very well, but again, because we have this common thing of music. I mean, it was difficult to leave because you can't stop talking,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
they can't stop talking. And there was one guy, and he was really quiet. But then when he started going, and I said to him, "You're on fire," because when he started talking about music, he just
Yeah.
his whole being just like lit up, and and it was just wonderful to see that energy from this young man
Yeah.
coming out and like throwing itself across the room, and everybody was picking up on it. And I just said that's just wonderful to see, you
Oh
know.
man, yeah, we love it. I think that's one of the most important conversations around any table should definitely be music, and if it's jazz, that's a cherry on top. Now, as an author, in closing, as an author, what's next for Sammy Stein?
Well, I've just done an interview with Corinne Bailey Ray, and that's going to go in Reader's Digest. And I'm doing two articles on, it's called um, Eight something. I've forgotten the actual title, but it's just listing, it's for my own site, and it's listing eight at a time. That's what I call it, of course. So each article will have eight women who are up and coming as musicians from all over the world and on any instrument. So, but it's just going to be eight. It's called Eight at a Time.
Yeah,
And then I'm doing a listicle, as they call them. One of these things for Reader's Digest where you can mention, it's like 10 best women musicians that you need to know. So
right,
that's the
right.
current thing.
Yeah.
So, and then launching this book in September. I've got my publicist is working on that. So it's various things are happening. So it's just enjoyable. Yeah.
Oh, we look forward to seeing it come alive, and we also look forward, to hearing more of your work and seeing more of your work. We'll be watching here from Johannesburg, looking into the life and times of Sammy Stein, and of course, enjoying what you share with us as we continue. But thank you so much for joining us, Sammy, and then of course. Thank you so much for the work that you do, the important work that you do of documenting jazz music and her people.
Thank you very much.
She is the author of Women in Jazz, Pause, Play, Repeat, The Wonder of Jazz, and the latest Fabulous Female Musicians. Sammy Stein on The K Jazz Show.